building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC 7, Hulu Live, and wherever you stream. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, Marin County is asking residents to report their home COVID test results. The county's public health officer will talk about whether it might bring back its indoor mask mandate also in the wake of the winter increase and the Omicron variant. But first, California's public health department this morning confirmed the very first known case of Omicron in the state and the U.S. It was a traveler who came back from South Africa on November 22nd, noticed symptoms on Thanksgiving Day, November 25th, tested on the 28th, got the positive result back on the 29th, and then was confirmed by UCSF genomic sequencing as Omicron indeed yesterday, November 30th. Now, San Francisco's Director of Public Health addressed this during Midday Live.
But I also want to emphasize that this is not a surprise. For those of you who have been following this, we knew that Omicron was going to be here. We thought it was already here. We just hadn't detected it yet. So this is cause for concern, but it is also certainly not a cause for us to panic.
All right, joining us now to talk about this discovery and what it means and how it factors into President Biden's announcement tomorrow regarding travel protocol is the director of the Center for Policy, Outcomes, and Prevention at Stanford and professor of pediatrics and health policy, Dr. Jason Wang. Dr. Wang, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kristen.
All right, so this is what we know in addition to the timeline we just laid out. The person has mild symptoms, self-quarantining right now. They're fully vaccinated but not boosted, which is normal, I guess, if you consider the fact that they're between the ages of 18 and 49 is the range. Close contacts have been contacted and tested negative. So I got to ask you, based on what you're hearing here, do you think if there's this one case, there are probably more from this particular cluster, if you will, or this case?
Well, I certainly think that the fact that all the contacts have been tracked and tested, and the person infected has been isolated, that's all a good thing. And the best we could do once a case arrived in the U.S. is to do contact tracing and testing, and if tested positive, then isolation and quarantine. And so I think they did everything right here. In terms of whether there are more to this cluster, I think it will be interesting to look into the flights that this person arrived, who was sitting next to this person in the vicinity, in terms of the seating, and whether there was mandated mask on the airplane because it's an enclosed space.
I try to get this information from California officials. They do not have it. I think the CDC perhaps might, in terms of who else was on that flight, right? And maybe even the flight before that, because maybe it wasn't nonstop from South Africa, probably wasn't. What about those folks on the other flights? Do you think they should be tracked down, tested, and perhaps isolated until testing negative?
Well, certainly, when we look into stopping the virus from coming in, we could certainly do a 14-day travel history to see if anybody has come from that region in the last 14 days. And that way, I think all the flights now keep people's phone number, email, flight number, and they have the seatings. Mm-hmm. And so they should be able to track individuals in that flight, or either from originating from South Africa or during the transfer through South Africa.
We know there are some countries that do this very, meticulously. Do you know if the U.S., like the CDC, is that who would do it, would do something like that?
Certainly the CDC has talked about doing the 14-day travel history and then informing the state and local government when they find an index case. And so I think there might be efforts underway there.
Okay. Well, let's hope so. And hopefully we'll hear more about, where those folks went. Today, San Francisco officials, in making this announcement, applauded this particular individual for getting tested when they had mild symptoms. That's great. But do you think the testing for returning travelers should be mandated?
And so, I think that when we think about border controls, we could think about 3 ways of doing it. The first way is pre-travel. And so that's probably the best way. So before somebody is traveling to the United States, we ask them to get a test, a pre-boarding test. And it used to be 3 days, started in November, that foreigners coming to the U.S. will need to be fully vaccinated and then get a negative test within 3 days, right? And now there seems to be a policy going towards a 1 day negative test. And so countries that are outside of the U.S., some of them may not be prepared to offer a 1 day testing, because even in the United States, you try to get a same day test. Sometimes it's difficult to get the results back. People are afraid that they will miss their flight.
Especially
so that's
if it's
one
PCR, right? It does take 1 or 2 days oftentimes. But that is what they're requiring, right? Because tomorrow President Biden will announce new restrictions for people flying in from other countries into the U.S. Like you were talking about, they want to shorten that testing window to 24 hours, before the flight. Do you think it sounds like a lot of countries won't be able to accommodate that? Like travelers stuck in this country, that country, just won't be able to get it in time?
I think that's going to be a challenge logistically to try to get a test done within 1 day. Now, if you could do a rapid test that's a lot shorter, like a 15-minute rapid test, but it's not as accurate, that could be done within a day.
All right, the second part of what we expect President Biden to announce tomorrow is a recommended test 3 to 5 days after the flight, after the person has returned to the U.S. Is that a good idea?
Certainly, I think it's a good idea. And again, it's how you implement it. And so, people coming from outside of the United States, particularly from regions that has the new variant, the Omicron, they could have gotten infected, let's say, 2 days before they travel, and they could test negative the day of the travel. But then they could become infectious to others, 2 or 3 days, or maybe, even 5 days after. That's the latency period of the virus. And so I think it's a good idea that for people to get tested after they have had international travel. And they could get it easily now in the United States. There are lots of testing centers and for free.
Well, this person did do that, right? 3 days after coming back, noticing symptoms. But that's not really enforceable, is it? Like here in the U.S., we don't have the tools to really make anyone test if they don't want to 3 to 5 days after they get back, right?
Yeah, I think we live in a democracy and a civil society, and part of that is the social contract that people need to feel that not only do they need to protect themselves, but also protect other people around them. And so we could encourage that in a civil society.
All right. The third part of what President Biden is set to announce tomorrow, we think, at least it's being reported by many news outlets, is that unvaccinated travelers should quarantine upon arrival. I know Taiwan, which you have done some work with in advising, has been doing mandatory quarantining, really for anyone who comes in, right? But it's an island and a lot less porous compared to the U.S. Could that be accomplished here?
I think it's going to be a lot more difficult. We have 300 ports of entry here in the United States and only 20 quarantine stations. And most of them are related to military facilities. And so for unvaccinated travelers, instead of trying to quarantine them, I think we could use a testing strategy. So like I said before, if they tested negative before they travel, and then they tested negative 2 or 3 days after travel, the post-test probability of having the virus is very low, assuming that the tests are good.
All right. Well, CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky announced it's expanding COVID surveillance at 4 U.S. airports. SFO is one of them. It's a testing service called Express Check. What does it actually add? What does it do?
So again, when somebody arrives in the U.S., they say they already had a negative pre-boarding test, and then they get an arrival test. Then the pre-test probability upon arrival is the pre-boarding test. Then after the arrival test, the post-test probability, if it's negative, the test is negative, it will give it a very, very low probability that the person is infected. So that does add our confidence that the person does not have the virus if they tested negative twice before boarding the flight and after arrival. Now, one caveat is that you have to be able to do that relatively quickly, because if you have large volume of passengers during the holidays, you have to be able to probably do the test, one test per minute. And we have done it in schools. It's possible, just to get a sample within a minute. That's possible.
So, Dr. Wang, before we let you go, I have one last question for you, because you are a pediatrician. So I think you can answer this. Which age group are you most concerned about right now, right? Because some say it's the vaccinated, but if it's the unvaccinated, does that mean kids 4 and under? Because, on the one hand, we hear they are better protected naturally. But on the other hand, we do know in South Africa, they've had a lot of kids cases recently. So building on your pediatrician background, what do you think?
Well, I think the population most at risk are the unvaccinated, and that includes adults that are unvaccinated, and also some kids that are unvaccinated. Some kids have chronic disease, such as asthma and obesity and so forth. And so anyone who's unvaccinated, I think, are at risk.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Dr. Jason Wang, thank you very much for your expertise and time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, we'll continue the conversation about Omicron. One local county is starting to count at-home tests in the Bay Area, and those are more important than ever. We'll talk more about that when we come back. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us today. We are going to talk to Marin County's Dr. Matt Willis coming up next, so get your questions ready. And my producer wanted me to take a look at something. Yes, Eric? Are you talking about Jasmine's question? Or... Oh, we do have a commercial break question. Okay. What is your biggest concern regarding COVID-19 right now? Is it variants? Is it the holiday surge? What else is it? I'm sure we didn't encapsulate everything that's out there that you're all feeling. So go ahead and answer on Facebook Live. I'm going to take a short break and look ahead, and then share some of your answers coming up. All right, everybody, let's do this. And we're back. We all know that when you drive somewhere for a COVID-19 test, that it gets logged, and then the county and California Department of Public Health get that data. But that doesn't always happen if you use a home test. That is changing, at least in Marin County. Joining us to talk more about this and other COVID matters is the county's public health officer, Dr. Matt Willis. Dr. Willis, thanks for your time today.
Good to be with you.
First, we got to start with the Omicron variant. First one detected in the U.S. happens to be in California, and it's a case in San Francisco, someone who flew into SFO from South Africa. I want to ask you, does Marin have a possible or a confirmed case that you know of?
We do not. We had a return traveler yesterday from South Africa, who was infected, but that person turned out not to be infected with the Omicron variant. So we are continuing to monitor. We have surveillance systems in place. We're not surprised to find that the first case was detected in the Bay Area. One, because we know we have a population that does tend to travel more, And we also have excellent surveillance systems in place, good laboratory relationships, so we're able to sequence a greater number of our samples regionally.
I see. And this person who returned, the one with the positive Omicron case, in the contact tracing that I'm sure is being done, do they have any contacts that are residing or working in Marin County that you know of?
Not that we know of. We're just learning about this too. I'm sure that the contact tracing that is happening right now is detail oriented, and they're getting every bit of the history they can to determine where this person may have been, who they may have exposed. And we have not been notified that anyone in Marin County was exposed yet.
Okay. So is Marin County taking any extra precautions or making or advising any changes? Our viewer Jasmine wants to know if lockdown would be possible again. Tell us what you guys are thinking right now.
Yeah, lockdown is not, right now is not on the horizon. That concept of a lockdown, the way we did back in March of last year when we first started seeing surges in cases. The policy changes now would be more nuanced or more specific. Right now, we are still waiting to learn more about the Omicron variant. And we're also looking at what's happening with our experience with Delta. I mean, we have to remember that our biggest threat right now still is the Delta variant and the possibility of a winter surge due to that. We only have one case of Omicron in the United States right now, happens to be in the Bay Area. So we're really we're confident in our surveillance systems. We're confident in our ability to monitor transmission as it occurs in our community. And we'll be watching that very closely over the coming days to determine whether or not we need to make any changes in policies. But right now, we're going to sit tight with where we are.
You are the only Bay Area county to have completely gotten rid of the indoor mask mandate for vaccinated or unvaccinated, right? Stores, malls, gyms, movie theaters, offices, no mandate for the county. Santa Cruz had lifted theirs, but they brought it back. Are you considering thinking about possibly bringing the mandate back?
Well, I think at this point, everything is on the table. We're, again, looking at our surveillance systems, monitoring cases as they occur. Our case rates are lower now than they were when we lifted the mandate. We lifted the mask mandate because we had met the criteria we had established earlier. At least 3 weeks in the CDC moderate transmission tier, over 80% of our population vaccinated, and low and stable hospitalization. So we achieved those 3 criteria, lifted the mandate. Because it makes sense when you institute a policy that's restrictive to have an exit strategy for it, to know when is it going to place and when it get lifted. So we met that criteria for lifting it, and we have not seen any increased transmission since then. So we're confident that we can stick with where we are, that we can, stick with where we are right now.
Yeah.
We do not need to reimpose the mask mandate. But again, if case rates start to surge, especially hospitalizations, I think that's an important point, is that we will be looking at evidence of severe illness as a potential trigger for changes towards more restrictive policies, more than case rates themselves per se. It's really be signs of more severe illness and hospitalizations as that indicator we'll be looking to.
I see. And from what I understand, hospitalizations have remained low, and even cases have been steady, like 20 cases or less a day, right? So nowhere near what it was during the Delta surge. That's good to hear. What about vaccination rates? I know overall very high for the county, but since the 5 to 11-year-olds started, what is the uptake there? Where are you at with that age group?
Yeah, I think our greatest asset and the reason we've been able to be successful in containing case rates, hospitalizations, and deaths has been our high vaccination rates. Our 5 to 11-year-olds came online just a month ago, and we've already vaccinated 60%. 60% of our 5 to 11-year-olds have been vaccinated with at least 1 dose. Today, we're starting at those second doses. So those that came in early November are now starting in for their second doses. So that's been great progress for us. Over 90% of our entire population who are eligible has been fully vaccinated. And that's really, we're hoping that people recognize that our success with preventing transmission, keeping our hospitalization rates down is really directly due to that, to the choices people have made to get vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers, you're sort of the envy of public health officers in many, many counties. Look, Peter, our viewer, has a question for you. He wants to know, basically, are symptoms of Omicron more severe than the previous variants? Do we know that? Do we have any evidence of that?
We don't yet know what the range of symptoms is yet for Omicron. And that's an important unanswered question. we do have hints from clinicians in Southern Africa that are taking care of patients with Omicron. And the report that we're hearing is reassuring that it may in fact be a milder constellation of symptoms. So we're definitely not hearing that it is causing more severe disease, driving people to the hospitalization and mortality. And we're hearing anecdotally that it may be less severe. So that would be excellent news for us. And that's something that we are very eager to learn more about, because that will be one of the most important determinants of our experience as a community.
Dr. Willis, please don't go away. We appreciate you sticking around for one more segment to answer more questions and talk about how you're going to incorporate at-home tests into Marin County's data. So we'll be right back. All right, we have a couple minutes just on Facebook Live while we do a commercial break and pay the bills. But Dr. Willis, the questions are just pouring in. Marie wants to know, is there going to be another vaccine shot for this new variant? What do you think?
Another vaccine? There could be. I know the vaccine manufacturers are, fortunately, the technology we have for the mRNA vaccines does lend itself to being able to modify the formula so that it can match the mutations on the new variants. So we know that's possible, and it might be one of the most important strategies for us from a public health standpoint. But it's going to be at least 3 months, I think, before we're able to see whether or not they're able to actually do that, manufacture at scale, and whether or not we need it. I think that's another important unanswered question: is the Omicron variant severe enough that would require another round of vaccines, or how well protective are the current vaccines against it? Once we know that, we may have another round of mass vaccinations that's more targeted as boosters towards the Omicron variant.
Okay. Are you working on sequencing in your own labs in Marin County to make sure you detect Omicron as soon as it gets there?
Yes. Yeah, we have relationships in place with several laboratories, and we issued a public health advisory to our clinicians on Monday saying, especially if you have someone who's returned from Southern Africa who's having symptoms, call us right away. We as a health department want to know. We can go and obtain samples directly and send them to laboratories for expedited sequencing to detect those variants. We went through that process yesterday with a South African returned traveler that did not have the Omicron variant. In the end, was Delta.
Yeah.
But those processes are in place, and those are the processes that San Francisco used to detect their Omicron case.
Yep, that's great to hear. All right, coming back out on TV in about 5 seconds. We are back with Marin County's Public Health Officer, Dr. Matt Willis. With Omicron now, testing becomes even more important, but generally home tests had not been counted officially. What is Marin County doing now to change that?
Well, we've been actively promoting the use of home tests. We know that one of our strategies to get out of this pandemic is to make sure that people are able to get diagnosed with this illness as soon as it comes on. And we know that people who are vaccinated tend to have more mild symptoms, and we don't want people to mistake, sniffles or a common cold for COVID-19. So we're promoting home-based testing, but at the same time, our surveillance systems really rely on laboratory testing. So the PCR tests that people have been familiar with over the past year are the way the public health departments get the results and do our understanding of where the virus is flowing. So we see this blind spot where people are doing home-based testing, but may not be sharing the results with public health. And so the way we're addressing that is to request that our residents use a form that we've put on getvaccinated.marin.org. It's on our website, and it's a home-based testing form, so that if you do test at home, you can report the results to us. That allows us both to see the case that may have occurred so that we can track case rates more accurately, but more importantly, so that we can reach out to people to offer them the supports they may need if they're positive.
I see. I wonder if those are very reliable, though, because there could be more user error with those, right?
That's right. It's important to follow the instructions with these home-based tests. We've been, using them in our schools. We've distributed them to almost every Marin County family that has school children, and have a video that goes along with that, and really have tailored teaching so that people understand how to use the tests. They're not complicated to use. But you do need to learn the steps. It's about 4 steps, and anyone can do it, but it needs to be done correctly to make sure that the results are accurate. The package insert is pretty good at walking through the process, but it's important to pay attention to that if you're using home tests.
I see. Now, if somebody tells you they do have a positive case from a home test, do you send them somewhere else for a follow-up test just to confirm?
Not necessarily. The tests are relatively accurate. And so what we do in those cases is treat a positive as a positive. They can certainly choose to seek confirmatory testing, but generally we'll advise them to isolate based on a positive result. And then it allows us to keep track of that as a potential case, especially if it's associated with a constellation of cases. It allows us to detect outbreaks. If we see multiple individuals from a given community or from a given setting reporting positive tests, it tells us that the virus is flowing in that place.
Got it. This sounds like a great idea to open up that blind spot. Here's a viewer question. Gregory wants to know if you think it's safe to be indoors with elderly parents if everyone is vaccinated and boosted, for Christmas, even with Omicron.
The answer is, that's the best thing here. The best way to protect yourselves is vaccine. And if you're vaccinated and boosted, it's safe to be indoors. I think it's safer. I would say, these days it's hard to know what is totally safe, but I think that's the safest we're going to get. And if the alternative is not being together, I think that tilts towards greater harm. We have social isolation. Mental health has been an important issue for us over the course of this pandemic. Being able to gather together in person for the holidays has a lot of benefit in terms of just our well-being, and we want to support that. Fully vaccinated and boosted, indoors together, we support that.
All right. So you would be comfortable flying your grandmother out to visit as long as she is vaccinated and boosted, right?
Well, the travel is a different question. So the first question was whether or not they can be indoors. The travel, we're looking closely to see what the travel guidance is. Travel carries its own risk because of your trip to the airport in there. If you're traveling from a distance, and especially if you're coming from a place where there's more virus activity. Certainly, travel from Southern Africa is prohibited right now. We're not allowing people into the country or non-residents from Southern Africa. But I think if you're traveling, an N95 mask is a good precaution to take, and making sure that you're covering your face kind of throughout that interval of travel.
Would you travel, yes or no, if you were not boosted?
I would not myself, no, or recommend it I think a booster, we're recognizing it with waning immunity, people who have been vaccinated.
Thank you. We had to keep that as a yes or no because we're out of time. Dr. Willis, we can finish this conversation over on Facebook Live. Take a short break. I know, I hate to do that, but I wanted to squeeze it in. I do want to ask you, though, something that I see a lot, if you have just 2 more minutes. Robert says, look, seemingly the symptoms so far have been mild with Omicron. Why all the hype? And I'm wondering if it's just because of the number of mutations that, lead scientists to think that possibly this one will be better at eluding the vaccine, or why does it seem like we're taking this one so seriously? Is it the mutations, or is it the fact that we went through Delta?
Well, I think it's a combination of it's not hype. I mean, this is real. This variant took over very quickly over a large population in Southern Africa. We know the Delta variant is highly infectious. It really established itself as a dominant strain globally. And yet here this Omicron variant came in, and within a matter of a week or so actually became the dominant strain in Southern Africa. And it has characteristics. So there's the population observation that it's spread very quickly. That's a concern. And then there's a molecular observation that it has these mutations that we know confer more infectivity. And that combination of sort of the epidemiologic and the laboratory evidence is concerning for the infectivity. What we really don't know and need to know more about is the severity and how will the vaccines protect against it. And
is the thinking still that we will know that in a week, in a week and a half, 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think, 2 weeks is we'll know a lot more. Every day we're learning more, but I think the questions around the immunology is going to take about 2 weeks because those are laboratory processes that just take a while to develop. So the understanding how well the vaccine protects us or how well protected we are if we've been infected in the past is going to take at least 2 weeks to answer. All right, Dr. Matt Willis, Marin County's Public Health Officer. We know you're super busy today. Thank you so much for your time and insight. Always great talking with you. Great talking with you. Bye-bye. Take care. All right, everybody, coming back out. Thanks for the great questions today.
And thanks for joining us today. We caught you up on everything we know about the Omicron case confirmed in San Francisco, the first in the country. Much more at 4 o'clock. See you then.